When my mother was pregnant with me, she and my father and my young brother bought a 40-acre farm on the northeast end of York County. Their dream was to give a place for my brother and I to run around in the woods, live among nature, and eventually own some livestock. They had no idea what they were doing. There was no manual for this. But eventually they learned. They learned how to care for the baby calves. They learned how to identify a sick cow. They learned generally how to sort of care for the land. So fast forward a few years, we had ended up having, at any given time, 30 Scotch Highland cows, which are the shaggy red cows that you see in movies. Yeah. And one day, one of them died out of the blue. We don't know how. We think maybe he was poisoned, but we really don't know. So what they had learned from some farmer friends is what you do when a livestock animal dies in the area. You call a place called valley protein. And what they do is they process this large animal down to tiny pellets of dog food and feed it to Fido. So we called valley protein, and they came out and they assessed the situation, and they decided that no, this cow that had died was too old. They couldn't make dog food out of it. So we said, okay, what do you do with a 1,000-pound dead animal? Well, you don't bury it. So what do you do? So in our case, we did nothing. We let it lay. And spring turned into summer at the farm. We saw all sorts of new walks of life and some of the old ones. New fresh calves were born, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We saw birds of prey that preyed on things that were smaller than them. We saw mammals that took what was available to them. We saw scavengers that preyed on the dead, dying, and weak. We saw the rodents that picked up the little bits, and we saw the insects that cleaned up the rest. So by the end of the summer, all that was left of our 1,000-pound problem was a small, pile of hair and bones. So fast forward a few more years. I'm 18 now. I've had this, this life of growing up among the woods and learning about the birds and the bees and the animals and all of that. And I decide I'm going to go to school in New York City. And so I show up there, with my suitcase, and I'm ready to go. But I had no idea what I was doing. There was no manual for this either. So I found that my 1,000-pound problem was that all of a sudden I was a farm girl in a city of 8 million, and I couldn't hang. I didn't know the big words that my classmates used. I didn't come from the big fancy California prep schools that they came from. And I just didn't know. So, like my parents many years before, 18 years before, I figured it out. And I started to learn that life was not so different from the farm that I grew up on to my new home of 8 million. There were new fresh calves, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. That was me. There were birds of prey that preyed on things much smaller than them. There were mammals that took whatever was available to them. There were scavengers that preyed on the dead, the dying, and the weak. There were rodents that picked up the small pieces, and there were insects that cleaned up the rest. And what I learned is that whenever you dive into something new that you have no idea what you're doing, if your first plan doesn't go as you thought, you can be rest assured that nature will surely take its course.